And in my opinion, those organizations that have been doing DEI, I guess, the right way, those things are already integrated. Your culture building programs are centered in inclusiveness. Your leadership development programs talk about leading inclusive teams and leading talent from diverse backgrounds. Fairness is something that a lot of high performing organizations just talk about. So when I hear that they're swapping DEI for these things, I just think that's a really interesting statement. And to your point, if you're that leader in that situation, what do you do? Like, where do you go when you still have to lead this very inclusive team?
Welcome to Leadership Rewired. Allison Allen and Dean Martin invite you to join them for an honest conversation that brings a personal perspective to the issues of leadership.
Why is it that some companies are pulling back on DEI while others are doubling down? And where does this leave you as a leader? Leadership today means walking a fine line, balancing inclusion, fairness, and performance, while navigating a workplace where DEI is literally shifting under your feet. Some companies are scaling back initiatives, others are rebranding, and many of you feel caught in the crossfire.
Yeah.
So how do you keep your team engaged, your culture strong, and your business moving forward without getting stuck in politics? I'm Allison Allen, and I'm here with my co-host, Dean Martin.
Hello.
And today we are going to spend some time talking about the noise and get really, really real about what's happening with DEI, and more importantly, how you can lead through it without waiting for a program or corporate mandate to tell you how.
Yeah. So that was.
Dean, do you want to get into the reality of what's going on?
Yeah, well, let's get into the reality. I was actually just chatting to a friend of mine 2 days ago who works in what was formerly called DE&I, and now the company he's working for, he was like, "Oh, we've just done a rebrand and it's now called whatever." Okay. And I think for a while, even in the last few months or so, even before the change in that administration, we could see, DE&I was as a term, was a set of policies. It's on shaky ground there. I think now we're in a new sort of territory where, I think primarily I'm seeing a rolling back of that term, or talking about DE&I primarily as a sort of political liability, a liability within organizations. I think that's top of the list. And then I think there may be organizations just, also there are other knock-on factors there. So economic concerns about that, or maybe there's always been shareholder skepticism, and this has now been an opportunity for board members or the management team to say, okay, let's cool our jets on this for a bit. Let's call it something else. So whilst and this is what we'll be talking about today, whilst we know that the leaders who are listening to this, and you and I, Allison, are deeply driven and committed to having an inclusive workforce, what does it mean now for a leader who was working somewhere where there was a DE&I department or function, and a whole lot of policies and a whole lot of good programs related to talent acquisition, or how leadership development programs happened, or supporting the employee resource groups, or bunches of other things. And now with some of that being changed or rebranded, let's just kind of make our way through that a little bit to see what might have changed. Maybe a policy has gone away, but beneath the policy, are there still practices and daily habits and ways of thinking that a leader can still adopt that is as inclusive as ever, but without relying on an organization's, which is super helpful, of course, but without relying on that, or saying, they took away DE&I. Well, maybe they took away the title, or maybe they took away the function. You're still a leader. You still have a bunch of people. How are you going to do inclusion in a different way?
Mm-hmm. What I find very interesting about this sort of rebrand is the fact that a lot of companies are actually, swapping it for culture building and leadership development and fairness initiatives, which I would have thought would have been around anyway.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, those organizations that have been doing DEI, I guess the right way, those things are already integrated. Your culture building programs are centered in inclusiveness. Your leadership development programs talk about leading inclusive teams and leading talent from diverse backgrounds. Fairness is something that a lot of high performing organizations just talk about. So when I hear that they're swapping DEI for these things, I just think that's a really interesting statement. And to your point, if you're that leader in that situation, what do you do? Like, where do you go when you still have to lead this very inclusive team?
Yeah.
The thing that you want to be thinking about, like, the programs are changing. Yeah. The world is changing around us, especially if you live in the US. Yeah. Your organization is still expecting you as a leader to build products, build services, make money for the clients that you serve. You can't ignore that. You still have to honor that within the team that you're working. All right. So let's just talk a little bit about like exactly where this leaves you. And I think the shift from programs to leadership behavior, like what does this really mean? I think for a lot of you, you were, we've got to do something in DEI. Let's go to the DEI team, right? Or I've got to hire to meet this DEI goal or this DEI metric. So let me work with DEI recruiters or DEI, the diversity, equity, and team to go to a specific conference. I think where we need to get to, and we need to flip the script, whether your team is getting rid of DEI or not, I think you have to flip the script around. How do I show up as a fair and inclusive leader every single day?
Yeah.
What are the things that I need to do? Because leadership is not about policies. It's really about me and my behavior, right? So some questions you might want to be thinking to yourself is, when I'm mentoring folks on my team, do I do that in a broad brush? Do I have a plan around it? Do I do it for high performers? Do I do it for everyone, or do I only do it for a few people on my team?
Right.
Like, how do I mentor and how do I give out opportunities to do the work?
Yeah. That's
something you can sit along with or use resources to help you think about that. Yeah. The other one that you might want to think about is, how do I give feedback? Is it fair? Is it constructive? Or am I one of these leaders who call people out in a different way than I treat other people? And more importantly, and we talk about this all the time on this podcast, do I create an environment where people feel that they can speak up and challenge ideas?
Yeah.
Dean, would you add anything to that list?
Well, the one thing that you encouraged our leaders to do is to think about the mentoring and the feedback and that kind of thing, which makes me also ask a somewhat provocative question of, if you only thought about inclusive behaviors when DE&I policies were in place, then were you really being that inclusive in any case? And I also, I'm being a pragmatic here, so maybe there are a whole bunch of leaders. There's a population of leaders who aren't, we're not labeling them as bad people or terrible in any way, but they're like, yeah, okay, if the policy's there, that will sort of keep me in check, and I'll follow how we do hiring, or I'll follow how we do whatever performance management, or how we identify top talent. I'll make sure there's no biases because that's the plan. But if some of this stuff goes away, and your reaction in any shape or form is like, oh, thank God. Now I can just get on and hire who I need to. Or, oh, it's going to be a lot easier when we do whatever, our promotions at the end of the year. Then, to think about that as well. Like, who am I mentoring? How am I getting feedback? The good stuff that you've said. And also, how else am I as a leader taking accountability for inclusion now? Because it is my responsibility. And yes, how fantastic that for decades we've had functions and departments that actually had headcount and deep expertise and leadership and support around these things. And also, we can still each do that. That's what we truly believe as leaders. Absolutely. Every single thing you do can be inclusive, just perhaps without the benefits of some kind of, economies of scale or some deeper rigor around a process. But you can still do it. If you've gotten into any good habits as a result of what DE&I has done in your workplace, stick with that stuff. Look at it. See how you can still use it, even if you don't technically have to now. Why would it still not, be something beneficial for you? So I think that's one thing for us for leaders to think about now. I'm still inclusion. I'm still DE&I, and then you can call it something else for yourself. But as a leader, I really am now, holding the torch for this and wanting to create an inclusive workforce or build a good culture, or maybe it's about, this is what I'd love to talk about, maybe it's about moving from using those 3 letters to what does a leader really do? If a leader's doing a really great job, what is happening? And I think psychological safety and creating an environment where everybody who's working for you feels safe and empowered to contribute in a full and meaningful way. I think that for me feels like something that, DE&I was also working towards as well. What do you think?
So where I was going was around doing a little bit of reflection around, are you giving, fair feedback? Are you mentoring and providing opportunities across the team? And are you creating a safe space? But you introduced something that I don't want to sort of gloss over, which is if you are one of these leaders who felt in some respects relief, right? That the DEI practices are gone.
Yeah.
Are you then saying that the reflective exercise isn't necessary? Or are you saying that maybe those folks need to be thinking about how they still continue to push inclusive teams? I want to make sure we don't miss where you were going with that.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely a case of reflecting for yourself. What was your reaction or your response to if something has changed in your organization? And I know, there's a whole range of changes that might be happening. Some radical and others maybe perhaps only in name. But to notice first for yourself, what is your reaction? That if something did change and if at any point you thought, oh, that's a relief, is to then pause immediately and go, how come? Was it just an onerous practice that it took longer for you to get a full, a nice diverse candidate slate, for example? Maybe that's the case. Maybe you could do it quicker. Sure. And also, what was the purpose of that? What was the benefit of that? What were the positive outcomes of that? So we can actually just not go for the quicker win of this will be easy and I don't have to worry now how I do this. And that's going to be a lot quicker. But to sort of look into that and go, there were very, very good reasons behind that. And if perhaps it's some intricacies of that process that bothered you, okay, now you may be free or liberated to tweak that. But that need is still there. You still need a diverse workforce, for example. So that's still going to be your responsibility. So I would say, that's the reflecting. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only thing I would add to what you just said is if you are a leader who felt in some respects, some relief knowing that the DEI practices were being taken away, I think to Dean's point, there is something about unpacking why that relief is needed. Is this, I get time back? Is this, is it, I don't feel the pressure to meet a goal that I don't necessarily believe in? Is it that I don't actually believe in diversity, equity, inclusion? I think we should be able to run our teams the way we need to run them. Whatever the answer is, and there may be other questions that you should ask yourself, whatever the answer is, I don't know of many organizations that exist today that does not need to have diverse perspectives when building products and solutions and services. for anything that's sold into the world. I don't know of this organization. I'm sure it exists, but I don't know of it. So if there is a reason, whether there's a DEI function or not, to think about, am I being inclusive? It is this, right? You can, and by the way, even if you have everybody on your team looks like you, whatever that is, the biggest mistake that you can make is assuming that there's no diversity, because you could have neurodiversity, you could have social economic diversity. You don't know how every person on your team was brought into this world and even brought up in this world. And so all of those things shape who we are as individuals and how we show up to work and what's important to us. Yeah. So reflecting on the 3 questions that I brought up at the beginning, which is, again, how do I give feedback? How do I pass out opportunities and mentor people? And then how do I create a safe space? And the nice ad that Dean brought in, and if I am excited that DEI is gone, how do I make sure that I don't why am I so excited that DEI is gone? And how am I still going to come back to building and delivering and executing on the deliverables that are expected of me? So that might be something else you would add. Dean, do you want to talk a little bit about like psychological safety in general? Because that's a word, it's a big word and it gets thrown around a lot. Do you want to talk about psychological safety? There's this thing out there around so psychological safety is the new DEI. I don't want to be on this podcast saying that, but I do think it's something that I'm curious about when you just think about psychological safety in general. What comes to mind for you, and what would be important for the leaders to know?
Sure. We'll have to make sure that our video editor doesn't cut that as a soundbite.
You're not saying that psychological safety is the new DEI, but it is sort of buzzing out there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, not to make light of it, I think there is a genuine concern around within organizations. How do we still do this? What do we call it? Let's call it something. What is it still actually? And I can then also see how, and in a way, like, who minds what you call it either, as long as you're doing it. But I can see how there certainly is a benefit for leaders to be thinking about, okay, if I'm wanting to pay attention to diversity, if I want to act in a way that feels equitable, if I want to really become inclusive, the real practice, the spirit of the law of DE&I rather than the letter, actually thinking about psychological safety is not a bad way to go. And that's some of the great work that Amy Edmondson did around it, which is a sense that people feel safe. That's where that safety word comes in, to be able to learn, to be in an environment in that team or in that organization. It's safe to learn. It's safe to be yourself. It's safe to ask questions without suffering negative consequences. And I'd also, I want to double down on that learn point, because if you think about what it requires for somebody to really learn and to try new things and to experiment and to innovate within a work environment, inevitably, if you really like pushing the limit or being creative, that requires an abundance of ideas. It requires a tolerance for a certain amount of failure and things not working out and having to go back to the beginning again and try something new. It takes a bit of risk to okay, I'm going to give it a go. I've done as much, as many calculations as I can to mitigate anything that's terrible, but there's an unknown. Let's push for it. This market or this product or this method. And psychological safety means what happens in that workplace still makes it okay for people to do that, to make a mistake or to say something that's maybe unpopular, or to come up with an idea that maybe isn't the most productive one, without the manager shunning them, without them being penalized, without them feeling bad for who they are. Whether it's their accent or their skin color or their gender identity, or even just like how they operate within a team meeting. None of those things these people will be penalized for. So I think, I don't know if there's anything else on that you want to add, Allison, about why that could be almost like a nice placeholder for thinking about, for a leader, instead of thinking about DE&I, well, if I can still orient myself towards is this something that my team would say is true for them? They feel the psychological safety because of how I'm leading them.
Mm-hmm. No, the only thing I would add is there's a couple of stats out there that basically say teams with high psychological safety are like 1.8 times more likely to innovate. Who could do, I bet you all of us could use some innovation these days. And there was another stat out there that basically said companies with high psychological safety see higher retention and engagement of high performers, which often I think we think high performers are only driven by money. And a lot of them are.
Yeah.
But quite a few of them are actually driven just by being able to do what they love doing it and being able to move within their organizations in a way where they can bring their best selves and the best ideas to the work. And that's like the most important thing.
Yeah.
A good test here would be, not test, but a good way, again, to go back to that list of questions that we've been talking about is when you're in meetings with your directs or in a broader team, do you notice that people ask questions? This is so simple. Like, it's like something you would think. Of course, people ask questions. Like, well, notice the people who go to ask a question, but then stop. Or those people who raise their hand or whatever you do in a meeting. And then they say, oh, that's okay. No, never mind.
Yeah.
Right. How do you encourage that person to continue? Yeah. And more importantly, why do you think they don't push forward with asking a question?
Yeah.
Again, this is just a simple way for you to say, am I creating an environment? Are my leaders creating an environment where people feel, to Dean's point earlier, they can ask questions, they can learn, they can be curious, they can try things, they can take risks without any sort of retribution or any kind of backlash.
Yeah. Can I continue to just talk about that? Yes, I love this example because it's a really concrete one. I know it's just one of many you could have picked, Allison, but if we can just run with it a little bit, if you can imagine to think for yourself, well, why would somebody not be asking a question? And there are 1,000 reasons why. But like you just said, I wonder why. So that could be, I don't want to ask a question because if it's the wrong question, my manager will think poorly of me, and I have evidence of that having happened before. Or if I ask this question, my team will have a negative reaction, and I have evidence of this having happened before. Or it could even be, I don't know how to ask a question because the way in which I prefer to work is, can somebody have given me a heads up that this is what we were talking about today? And I would have liked to have done at least a bit of research or got my notes together or prepared. I'm not like on the spur of the moment kind of person. So I'm not going to be able to, it doesn't feel psychologically safe for me to just say, any questions? You're like, no, I would have liked some time to prepare because I'm sort of that way oriented in terms of my thinking. So that's also something like, what is the leader doing to make sure that people can be at their best and are not suffering in any way, whether it's preparation or encouragement or confidence or praise, whatever that stuff is. So there may be a lot of reasons why somebody doesn't feel, that it's appropriate for them to speak up or to ask a question.
Yeah. And I think I love what you just introduced there, which is, my question of the leader is, do you think people feel safe? I think there is something even further around ensuring people have all the same information in the way that they take in information. Nice. So if I'm at a meeting and I'm speaking to a slide and I'm talking, most people are probably, or some people are probably following me. There are a lot of people who are processing literally every word I'm saying, or they're reading what's on the screen. And how could we have made that meeting even more effective by, to your point, sharing some of this information before? So people have their questions, their thoughts. Yeah. I was coaching someone years ago, and the sound of her own voice made her uncomfortable asking questions in meetings. Wow. But when she was one-on-one with people, she felt comfortable kind of expressing herself. But in a bigger group, just the sound of her voice made her uncomfortable to speak. Now, a leader would say, well, what's my job there? Yeah. Well, how often are we saying all voices are welcome? Yeah. Some of you guys are concerned about saying something, but, put it in the chat.
Right.
let's have some of our questions come in chat form.
Yes.
Like, how do you make meetings way more flexible? Now, this feels like another podcast already, but that's part of this notion of, creating a space where people can be fully comfortable communicating in the way that they communicate.
Yeah. Which is, let's whisper into the mic, being inclusive.
Yeah.
Right. Don't tell anyone. But,
right.
That's what it is, because you're a leader and you say, I've got a team of 8. I need to get everything I can from my team of 8 or my organization of 500. Why would I not?
Yeah.
Why would I have 8 and only want to listen from those 2 guys?
Yeah. 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 So if you're feeling the pressure to move away from DEI, but you still want to build a strong and engaged culture, start with, again, creating a psychological safe, space for people to basically just be able to communicate in a way that they feel safe, that there will be no retribution or pushback.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about we just talk about, again, we talked about feedback. We talked about mentoring and opportunities across the team.
Yeah.
We talked about creating a space where people can communicate.
Yeah.
We introduced, reflective moment for yourself. How do you feel about DEI, either going forward or not going forward within your organization? And how do you still yet, build an inclusive team? What are some other things that you would want leaders to think about in this moment, Dean?
So many. Can I tell you one thing that I think is actually like a direct action that a leader could do right now to think about this is almost do what I call like your own job review, like a job description, or look at your calendar for the week. So it's getting really concrete. You might say, I know what my job is, but humor me. Sit down for a hot minute and look at all the main buckets of work of what you do. Or look at your calendar and say, what was I doing? A client meeting and writing notes and doing data and And then in order to really take that accountability of, am I being an inclusive leader? Am I creating psychological safety? So almost scan through what are the main buckets, whether it's your job description or your calendar. What are the things that I've been doing? And has there been any kind of pattern or any kind of habit that I'm getting into that I may have adopted because it's really efficient or quick, but inadvertently I'm making it harder for me to really make sure everybody is psychologically safe, or I'm not getting the best out of everyone. So a concrete example might even be, I run a couple of meetings, of course. Okay, pause for a minute and go, like you've just given us that great example, Allison, like who's speaking up in my meetings, or how am I getting the best out of people there? What is another task you're doing? Maybe you're hiring at the moment. Okay, is there a way in which I can make sure I'm getting candidates, the best candidates possible from a diverse, source of colleges or however I'm hiring? Or am I making sure that I have diverse candidate slates? That's an example. What's another thing somebody's doing? I don't know. You're setting a vision for your people.
Yeah.
Think about how am I speaking about this vision for the work that we're doing? Would everybody in this team really be bought into the language that I'm using? So you're just doing like a quick scan again, because it becomes habit, how we work. In order for us to really now check again and go, am I being this transparent and trustworthy leader that's inclusive? We need to pause for a minute and just double check. So I think that's a really practical thing that people can do and see. Are there patterns, people I'm always relying upon? Are there perhaps some biases that I have, like a speed bias? I want to make a quick decision, so therefore I don't wait for this department. Or I have a similarity bias. I like people who, I don't know, have the same area of expertise as me, so I'm less likely to ask other people in another department for their point of view. Like, there are a lot of things that could actually be getting in my way, even though I'm a caring and a committed to the cause kind of leader. So that's the one big action I would encourage people to take.
Yeah, where I thought you were going, which I would just add to what you've said, because I agree with what you said, is, I wonder how many leaders, whether they believe in DEI programs or not, have actually said to their teams, DEI is going away here. Let's talk about it.
Right.
To get a sense of I doubt if the organization is doing some big engagement survey to see whether or not people are okay with the DEI programs going in. But how are you as the leader sort of saying, DEI programs are going away here? It's becoming less of a focus. I want to just know from you folks, what are your thoughts? Let's just have an open conversation right now.
Yeah.
Sometimes by simply acknowledging what could be perceived as crazy, demonstrates that you actually are thinking about them. So whether you believe in it or support it going away, sometimes just asking that question and then just listening.
Yeah.
Just listening to what people have to say. And if it turns out it's a big deal for your team, you could then say, then why don't we put together a SWAT team or a small team that can work across our organization and figure out what are the inclusive practices that we can keep to ensure that we're building a high-performing team. Again, taking some perceived action and creating a space where those people on your team who care about DEI don't feel like they're lost in the shuffle, and that you, in essence, care about creating, a workplace where people feel safe and valued and heard.
I think that's
something as small as that. What are your thoughts on that, Dean?
I love that. Tell me if this could also work. Like if you're a leader, perhaps in an organization that has swiftly removed DE&I, and where maybe you're one of few who really is committed to this. How could you, maybe not do this at a larger scale, but maybe you do have 9 directs and you can't use the words DE and I, but you still want to do this stuff. I wonder if this is still an acknowledgement of like, wow, this has changed within our organization. And then to be kind of stealth in it and say, instead of saying, well, let's make sure we still have diverse hiring practices, is to go, I want you to know I'm committed to getting the best talent. Which means same thing, whispering into the mic, would that, do you think that would still work, Allison? Is that still something a leader can do or should do?
I think it's a shame, but I do think there might be these organizations where you literally can't even use the acronym, right? So instead of saying something like, we need to focus on DEI, we might say something like, we need to ensure every team member has the tools and opportunities to do their best work.
Yeah.
Right. So if you started with that, we need to ensure that every team member has the tools and opportunities to do their best work. What goes into that? That goes, how you assign work, the feedback you're giving, how you mentor people, and how do you create a safe space? Yeah. So I would just hate to think about being in an organization where you can't even use the acronym anymore, but I'm sure it exists. But again, as a leader, it's still important for you to get the best out of that team. Yeah. And I'm going to say it again, just because everybody looks like you, don't assume they all think the way you do, because you might actually be, barking up the wrong tree. Yeah. Another thing to think about is, instead of saying something like, we need a DEI strategy, which we've heard for years, right? How about if we say things like, we need to make sure that our leadership decisions are fair and performance driven. So if you are saying fair and performance driven, you're saying everybody on the team was being looked at through the same lens. Yes. Again, another way to stay away from the acronym, but get you to focus on making things equitable across the team. Yeah. Does that make sense?
I love that. In a way, like my little heart bleeds that we actually are at this place. And also I'm like, okay. Isn't that also what any kind of good leadership is to kind of read the room and whatever it is, let's skip the DE&I conversation. Let's say you've got a manager who's got to be in their bonnet about a certain thing. What do you do as a leader? You make sure you're wrapping things up to always talk about. Your leader's got a big thing about efficiency. Oh, you're always talking about, are we doing this because it's efficient, and I've hired because it's efficient, and, or you've got I don't know, a VP who cares a lot about, I don't know, accuracy. Suddenly you're packaging everything up and talking about we did this so that we were accurate. In a way, your work doesn't really change that much.
Right.
They tweak it a bit, but how you talk about it and how you sell the vision and how you communicate it, that's the nuance and that's the skill of what we're doing as a leader. So here we go. Unfortunately, it's about DE&I, but here's a chance to go, okay, didn't see this one coming, or maybe you did. I'm still going to do it. I still care about it. Of course I do. I've cared about it before it even was a thing. I'll care about it till my dying day. How do I talk about it with my team? How do I make sure I'm still making the most of whatever policies are present or what budget is available? Beyond that, I'm going to keep going and not worry.
Yeah, I think what's great about what you just said, and I hope this doesn't date myself, but I actually remember working where you didn't have a DEI department.
Oh, yeah, me too.
And so like, if you could think about that and then think about what was important. And it's exactly what you just said, which is why I made my comment at the earlier of this podcast. It's like, it's so interesting that organizations are changing their name, the DEI department into leadership and culture. And it's like, leadership and culture have been around, as long as I can remember since I've started working. And, fairness and performance driven have always been super important to high performing organizations. Yeah. And so, at the end of the day, it's not about checking a box, folks. At the end of the day, it's what it's about. And it's always been, it's about making sure your team is set up to win. And how do you do that is by making sure that everybody in your team is getting the same opportunities, that mentorship is fair and that feedback is fair, and that you're creating a space so that people can work. That is literally what it's all about. Yeah. And that they're set up to win, which is what we all want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So big takeaways for this conversation, Dean. Like, what's your big takeaway, and what challenge do you want to sort of throw at the leaders to think about?
I think my one big takeaway, I really like what you said, let's figure out how you're going to talk to your team about it. Whether you're running a big function or whether you have a smaller group of direct reports, figure out how you're going to talk about it, because your top talent is watching. Mm-hmm. Your future talent is watching. So I think that's my one takeaway there. And thank you for reminding us of that, Allison. Like, speak about it to your team, be as transparent as you can, or package it how you need to. And then secondly, I would just say, as we're closing, just stay open to learning about this. We are in a different way of leading now. If this is like the post-DEI acronym era, okay, you're listening and you care about this stuff because it is important. It's part of your leadership identity and probably all over your values. So how do we move forward in this space? Allison and I are going to stick close to you with this podcast as well in talking about this, but, stay open to learning. There's going to be a whole bunch of new things that we're going to be able to uncover about ourselves and how to do this at scale, how to do this in a meaningful, loving way with our people so that we're still achieving the same beautiful outcomes, but it's just called something a little bit different. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think my biggest takeaway is kind of the point that you introduced. However you feel about DEI going or staying, however you feel about DEI in general, this is all about leading people, period. Yeah. And if you are in a leadership role, your job, and you will be measured on this, and you should already be measured on this, is to get the best out of people so you can get products and services and solutions built for your clients or your clients or the company's clients to buy or to sell. And so your job is to figure out how to do that. Yeah. And the simplest way to think about that is in your feedback, in your mentorship. I keep beating that drum, and how you give out opportunities. Are you fair? Are you performance driven? And do you create a space for people to feel comfortable to be themselves? Yeah. That would be hopefully the biggest takeaway I would want you to take from these conversations. And by the way, everything we just named is small. And I know you may say, are you kidding? No, it's actually everything we just named. They're small. These are small intentional shifts that you can focus on and you can work on with your directs or work on with your team.
Yeah.
And you can practice it and you can be bumpy with it. So it really doesn't matter what's going on out here in the universe around these big sweeping changes. What's going on with your team and how are you treating them? And how are you leading by example to create inclusive spaces where people can exist?
Yeah.
As always, we love when people throw these topics at us and we love discussing these topics and we love throwing things into the conversation. We really appreciate you and are here for you, as Dean mentioned. And thank you for being part of the community. Until next time, thank you.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you.